In 1974, in a working-class kitchen in Ohio or Iowa, your mother could set a dessert on the table that was enough for 6 people for less than $1. A box of pudding, a bag of cookies, a can of fruit, a few spoonfuls of sugar, and a chilled bowl were sometimes all it took to make the children stand waiting around the table. The soft scrape of a spoon against the bowl's side, the smell of vanilla, canned pineapple, and cold milk drifted through the small kitchen. Those desserts were cheap and simple, but many people still remember them longer than the beautiful cakes from the bakery. Dish number 19 once made slices of white cake come alive, with soft, trembling streaks of red and green gelatin beneath a layer of cream. Dish number 14 was missing many familiar ingredients, and yet it still rose soft and tender in a square pan. And dish number 1, the banana cream cake under $2, was once enough to preserve one person's reputation in the family. Tonight, the recipe box opens once again. Stay with this story. Somewhere among these 25 old desserts, you may recognize a kitchen, a mixing bowl, or someone who once quietly made something sweet for you through difficult days. If gentle memories like these make you want to hear more, please subscribe so we can keep opening the forgotten recipe cards together. And these 25 old desserts begin with number 25, the no-bake sweets. When the pantry was enough to make children wait, not every dessert needed a hot oven glowing red. In many working-class American kitchens of the 1970s, something sweet began with the sound of wax paper being spread out, a spoon tapping against the side of a pot, the refrigerator door pulling shut with a soft seal in the night. The smell of hot sugar, cocoa, cold milk, and crushed cookies once made children move just a little closer to the table. She understood that. A small pot, a glass pan, and one large bowl were enough to give the afternoon something to look forward to. Number 25. No-bake chocolate oatmeal cookies. The smell of chocolate rose before the children could even pull their chairs close to the table. On the wax paper, each spoonful of cookie mixture still looked glossy, soft, and gently warm under the kitchen light. Around 1975, in church cookbooks across Iowa, Ohio, and Illinois, one batch of no-bake chocolate oatmeal cookies could make nearly 30 cookies for about 75 cents, just enough for a small gathering after service or a Saturday afternoon with several children waiting around the table. She boiled sugar, milk, butter, and cocoa powder in a small pot until the chocolate mixture came to a hard boil, foaming thickly and giving off a sweet smell that was almost scorched around the edges of the pot. Then she lifted it off the stove, quickly stirred in the oats, peanut butter, and vanilla, spooned each mound onto wax paper, and waited for the tops to set. The secret was 1 full minute of boiling. In kitchens with few tools, 1 well-timed minute was worth more than a pretty clock. Too soon, and the cookies would run soft. Too long, and they would turn dry and crumbly. She knew just by looking at the boil. 1 boiling minute held the whole memory together. Number 24. Chilled graham cracker layer cake. A tray of dessert sat quietly in the refrigerator overnight. The kitchen lights went off early, but inside the old fridge, each layer of cracker was slowly softening in the cool cream. Around 1974, in working-class family kitchens in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1 box of graham crackers cost about 45 cents, the frosting about 60 cents, and the whole chilled tray came to nearly $1.10 for 6 people. She arranged the graham crackers in neat layers in a glass pan, spread frosting over the top, smoothed it gently so the cream reached the corners, then kept layering, spreading, pressing, and covering it with foil. After that, she placed the tray in the refrigerator. The door closed. The soft hum of the cooling machine did the rest. This was a dessert from kitchens that knew how to wait. The crackers drew moisture from the cream, softened overnight, and by the next morning, They could be cut into tidy, creamy stripes like a humble birthday cake. The old refrigerator did its job over time. Number 23. Dirt pudding for children. A child saw the clean flower pot sitting on the table and thought it was a joke. Then the spoon dipped into the layer of chocolate crumbs that looked like soft soil after rain. Around 1977, at backyard birthday parties for working-class families in the suburbs of Indianapolis, Indiana, and Columbus, Ohio, one bag of chocolate cookies cost about 89 cents, one box of pudding mix about 40 cents, and the whole bowl of dirt pudding came to around $1.30. She crushed the cookies into fine crumbs, poured cold chocolate pudding into a large bowl, stirred until the cream thickened, then layered everything in turns, black, brown, smooth, and crumbly. Later, when gummy worms began showing up more often on children's party tables, they were stuck into the top like a very American bit of mischief. This dessert belonged to backyards, paper napkins, cheap balloons, and the sound of children laughing while the adults pretended to make disgusted faces. A clean flower pot, a fake flower, and a plastic spoon were enough to give the memory a shape. That little joke stayed for a long time. The cold bowls on the church table. In many American towns in the 1970s, dessert followed a mother out of her own kitchen. It sat in a glass bowl covered with plastic wrap, went down into the church basement, and was placed on a long folding table beside thin paper plates, a large coffee urn, and the sound of metal chairs scraping across the floor. Number 22. Watergate pistachio salad. Among the brown and white trays of cake, a pale green bowl glowed strangely and memorably. The children noticed it first, and then the adults went back for another spoonful too. Around 1975, on church potluck tables in Iowa, Alabama, and Tennessee, a double batch of Watergate salad could cost less than $3, enough for nearly 30 people to take a spoonful of something pale green, cold, soft. She mixed pistachio pudding powder with whipped topping, gently folded in crushed pineapple, scattered in the mini marshmallows, then chilled it until the whole bowl came together in soft green like an old tablecloth after Easter service. When she served it, she spooned it out slowly, letting the cream fall onto the paper plate with the faintest sound. This was a dish made for a crowded table. A bowl large enough, and a hand that knew how to show up, could make the whole neighborhood remember the person who brought it. That green bowl was always recognized. Number 21. Ambrosia fruit salad. The smell of pineapple, mandarin oranges, and chilled coconut rose when the bowl's lid was opened. For a moment, a Midwestern kitchen seemed to hold a little warm sunlight from somewhere far away. Around 1973, on holiday tables in working-class Midwestern homes, especially at Easter lunch or Sunday dinner, a family-sized bowl of ambrosia for 8 people could be made for about $1.50. She mixed canned mandarin oranges, golden pineapple, shredded coconut, mini marshmallows, and sour cream in a deep bowl. She folded it gently so the orange segments would not break, covered the bowl completely, and chilled it overnight. By the next morning, the marshmallows had softened, the coconut had soaked up the fruit juice, and the spoon moved down into something damp, smooth, and very gentle. This dish stood somewhere between fruit salad and dessert at the end of the meal. On a holiday table, people needed it to be there in the right place, beside the ham, soft rolls, and hot coffee. Holidays once smelled like cold pineapple. Number 20. Chilled cherry cream tray. The deep red cherry layer shone under the hall lights. Beneath it, the white cream sat cold, light, and soft as a cloud. Around 1976, at church suppers, in community cookbooks, and at school fundraisers across the Midwest, a tray of cherry delight, large enough to serve nearly 30 people, could be made for under $4. She pressed graham cracker crumbs into the bottom of the pan, beat cream cheese with powdered sugar, mixed it with whipped topping to make it light, then spread the cherry filling over the top. The tray was made the night before and sat quietly in the cold until the knife cut down into neat red and white squares. It went by many names in community cookbooks, but when the cherry layer caught the light, someone would always lean in and quietly ask, "How do you make this recipe?" The name changed, but the cherry tray remained. From those cold bowls on community tables, the kitchen of the 1970s moved into another place. The back of a box, a can label, and the small recipes printed right on the packaging. Recipes on the box. When the pantry became the cookbook. There was a time when the pantry was almost like a cookbook. The back of a box, the label on a can, and a small clipping cut from packaging could go straight into her recipe box. Those recipes entered the American kitchen through the sound of a can lid opening, the rustle of a cardboard box, and the smell of white sugar clinging to fingertips. Number 19. White poke cake with gelatin. A slice of white cake was cut open and inside were red or green streaks running down through tiny holes, soft, cool, and lightly trembling beneath the white cream. Around 1975, in home baking kitchens across the Midwest and the American suburbs, a pan of Jell-O poke cake could cost less than $2, enough to turn white cake, gelatin, and whipped topping into a bright, cheerful dessert on the weekend table. She baked a pan of white cake, set it on a rack so the heat could cool down, then used the handle of a wooden spoon to poke neat rows of small holes. After that, she poured the still liquid gelatin over the top of the cake, tilted the pan gently so the color could sink in, chilled it, and then spread a smooth layer of white cream over the top. This was a dessert for home bakers who wanted something colorful but still affordable. When the knife cut down, each little hole in the cake held a soft, trembling pocket of color. Each hole held a sweet color. Number 18. Spice cake with hidden tomato soup. A can of tomato soup was opened with a soft metallic pop, and that thick red stream went straight into a bowl of brown cake batter, fragrant with cinnamon. Around 1975, in frugal kitchens, using recipes printed on Campbell's cans across the Midwest and the northeastern United States, a tomato soup spice cake could cost about $1.25 to $1.75. She opened the can, scraped the condensed soup into the bowl, and stirred it together with spice cake mix, brown sugar, and cinnamon until the batter grew deeper in color. She poured it into a pan, baked it until the top cracked slightly, then spread cream cheese frosting over it once the cake had cooled, letting that small tang help make the cake moister and softer. In a frugal kitchen, a can of soup could go farther than its paper label promised. If it made the cake moist, fragrant, and cheaper, she kept that recipe. She knew what worked. Number 17. 7-layer bars with sweetened condensed milk. An ordinary pan was covered layer by layer. A hand-scattered coconut drizzled sweetened condensed milk and then waited for the oven to turn the sugar toward the smell of caramel. Around 1975, at school, bake sale fundraisers, and church tables across the Midwest, one pan of magic cookie bars, cut into 48 bars, could be made for under $2.50. She pressed graham cracker crumbs into the bottom of the pan, poured sweetened condensed milk over them in a thick white stream, then scattered chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, shredded coconut, and chopped nuts across the top. As it baked, the edges darkened, the coconut grew more fragrant, and the center turned sticky, chewy, and sweet. This was a dessert made for the bake sale table. One pan could be cut into many pieces, wrapped in wax paper, placed beside a box of loose change, and disappear very quickly after the school bell rang. 7 layers, one pan. The boxes left recipes behind, but in the old kitchen, many desserts began instead with stale bread, soft apples, and the thought that nothing should be thrown away too soon. Sweets from leftovers. Nothing was thrown away too soon. In a working-class American kitchen, Old bread was not ready for the trash. Soft apples still had sweetness left in them. A cake missing many ingredients could still rise as long as the hands making it understood flour, water, vinegar, and heat. Number 16. Old-fashioned baked apple brown Betty. The smell of apples, butter, and cinnamon made the house feel warmer than it really was. Under the spoon, the breadcrumbs around the edge of the dish broke apart very lightly. Around 1970, in frugal kitchens across New England and the Midwest, brown Betty could be made from cheap apples and old bread for less than 50 cents for the whole dessert. She sliced the apples thin, mixed breadcrumbs with butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon, then layered everything into the baking dish. Once the dish went into the oven, the apple juices simmered quietly beneath the crumb topping, the butter melted, and the sugar clung to the edges of the dish, turning into the warm brown smell of caramel. Before ready-made apple pies became common in stores, this dessert gave old bread another life. The kitchen window fogged with steam, and the old spoon touching the baking dish sounded deeply familiar. Old bread became autumn. Number 15. Baked bread custard with vanilla sauce. Dry bread sat in the baking dish, then slowly softened under the custard. When it came out of the oven, the top had puffed golden, and the smell of vanilla drifted gently through the room. Around 1974, in working-class family kitchens in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and across the Midwest, a pan of bread pudding with vanilla sauce could cost about 60 cents to $1.10. She tore the bread into the dish, beat eggs with milk, sugar, and vanilla, poured the mixture over the top, then pressed the bread down so it could soak. The oven slowly browned the surface, made the edges slightly chewy, and kept the center soft. When she served it, she poured hot vanilla sauce over each portion. This was the dessert of quiet care. It made something dry and hard soft again, made the kitchen feel less cold, and gave a poor supper a gentler ending. Not wasting was a kind of love, too. Number 14. Chocolate cake without eggs or butter. In the square pan, cocoa powder, oil, vinegar, and cold water met. A fork stirred a few times, and still the cake rose softly. Around 1976, in frugal pantry kitchens of working-class families across Appalachia and the Midwest, a pan of wacky cake could be made for about 85 cents to $1.10. She put flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, and salt into the pan, made 3 small wells, poured oil, vanilla, and vinegar into each one, then added cold water and stirred it all with a fork. As it baked, the top cracked slightly, and the smell of chocolate rose slowly. This dessert spoke of making do in a very calm voice. Children saw a chocolate cake on the table. They heard the knife cut through the soft surface. They remembered the sweetness more than the things the pan had been missing. Even scarcity knew how to rise softly. Old bread could become dessert. A cake without eggs could still rise. And on the pantry shelves of the 1970s, cans of fruit were also waiting to be turned into something prettier than they looked. Canned fruit, cast iron, and the smell of caramel. On a pantry shelf in the 1970s, there might have been a can of pineapple rings, a can of cherry pie filling, a box of yellow cake mix, and a jar of applesauce. They sat there very quietly. But when they met hot butter, brown sugar, a cast iron skillet, and the oven, the whole kitchen could start smelling like a small holiday. Number 13. Pineapple upside-down cake. A plate was placed over the mouth of the skillet. The whole table seemed to hold its breath as she flipped the cake in one single motion. Around 1971, in family kitchens with cast iron skillets across the Midwest and the South, a can of pineapple rings costing about 39 cents could become a whole pineapple upside-down cake for under $1.50. She melted butter in the cast iron skillet, pressed brown sugar into the hot butter, arranged each pineapple ring across the bottom of the pan, and then placed a red cherry in the center of every golden circle. The cake batter was poured over the top and gently smoothed with a spoon. When the cake was done, she held the skillet with both hands and flipped it with confidence. That moment made the kitchen light up. Caramelized pineapple ran down the sides of the cake, the cherries gleamed, and something very ordinary suddenly looked as if it had just stepped out of a magazine page. One flip made a cheap dessert beautiful. Number 12. Fruit dump. Cake fruit bubbled up through the golden cracks. The top of the cake was crisp in patches, while underneath was a soft, hot layer of sweetness. Around 1974, at church potluck tables, school suppers, and bake sales across the Midwest, a pan of dump cake could cost under $1.50. She poured cherry pie filling into the bottom of the pan, scattered crushed pineapple over it, covered everything with an even layer of dry yellow cake mix, then placed slices of butter all across the top. The pan went into the oven. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, closed the oven door, and let the heat do its work. This dessert suited busy people. One large pan made many servings, with a buttery crisp top and a soft, sweet layer underneath, while the spoon dipped deep into it sounded wet and warm. Fruit bubbled beneath a golden, crisp layer. Number 11. Applesauce cake. A jar of applesauce was opened in the middle of July, but when the cake was done, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and fall. Around 1972, kitchens that still carried traces of wartime cooking across the Midwest and the foothills of Appalachia, a jar of applesauce costing about 30 cents could help make a whole applesauce cake for under $1. She opened the jar of applesauce, stirred it into flour, sugar, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, then poured the pale brown batter into the pan. As it baked, the applesauce kept the crumb moist, softened the smell of the spices, and helped the cake stay on the counter for several days without drying out. This was a cake for a family that needed one dessert to last longer than a single meal. Each slice carried the smell of cinnamon, a very light taste of apple, and the feeling of home lingering on the fingertips. One jar of apples kept the cake soft. Canned fruit made the kitchen shine, but there were sweet dishes that did not come from one quick flip or one fast tray. Some desserts were only good because someone was willing to stand beside the stove long enough. The desserts that need slow stirring: tapioca, rice, and custard. In the recipe box, the cards for slow-cooked desserts were often more wrinkled at the edges than the others. Maybe they had spent more time near the stove. Maybe her hands had touched them while still sticky with milk, sugar, and vanilla. Number 10. Slow-cooked tapioca pudding. The wooden spoon circled the pot for nearly an hour. The tapioca slowly turned translucent, softened, rose to the surface, then gently popped between the teeth when eaten. Around 1972, in working-class family kitchens across the Midwest and small American towns, a serving of tapioca pudding could cost about 40 cents, but what it asked for in return was nearly an hour of standing beside the stove. She cooked the tapioca with whole milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla over low heat. She stirred steadily, lowered the flame, watched the surface of the pot, and waited for the mixture to thicken and turn glossy. Once the pudding cooled, she spooned it into bowls, covered them, and chilled them overnight so the milky flavor could soften. The instant version was faster, but the old one held on to its own ritual. A wooden spoon, low heat, steam on the window glass, and someone willing to watch the pot change little by little. Patience once tasted like vanilla. Number 9. Cinnamon. Rice pudding. The smell of rice and milk thickening on the stove was hard to mistake. The top was covered with a thin layer of cinnamon, warm and quiet. Around 1970, in working-class family kitchens across the Midwest, long-grain rice at about 30 cents a pound could be cooked into many bowls of cinnamon rice pudding for the whole family. She simmered the rice with milk and sugar in a white enamel pot, stirring along the bottom so the milk would not scorch, then waited for the grains to swell and soften. When the pudding thickened, she turned off the heat, sprinkled cinnamon over the top, and set each bowl on the table to the soft sound of a silver spoon touching the rim of the china. This was a dish for slow evenings. There was still rice in the bag, milk in the bottle, and the house needed something softer than words. Rice and milk knew how to calm the night. Number 8. Baked banana custard pudding. She stood beside the stove, stirring egg yolks, milk, sugar, and flour until the custard turned smooth and glossy. The smell of vanilla rose very lightly. Around 1973, in family kitchens across the American South and at church suppers, one large dish of banana pudding, enough for 8 people, could be made for under $2. She arranged vanilla wafers across the bottom of the dish, covered them with sliced bananas, and then poured hot custard into every gap. After that, she beat the egg whites until they were fluffy, spread them over the top, pulled them into little peaks, and baked them until the tips turned golden. The ingredients in this dish were humble, but it required a hand that understood heat. The custard had to be smooth. The bananas had to be just soft enough. The topping had to tremble slightly when it came out of the oven. Skill made a cheap dish feel precious. Some dishes needed slow stirring, but the 1970s also had cold trays and large sheet cakes, cheap, easy to cut, easy to carry, and more formal-looking than their real cost. The cheap baking trays that looked fancy. At church suppers and crowded family tables, a cheap tray of cake could still be remembered for a very long time. It cut neatly, held its shape on a paper plate, had a bright layer of cream, had a pretty surface, and made someone lean in and quietly ask for the recipe. Number 7. Cold lemon cream tray. A cold square of lemon dessert sat neatly on a paper plate. The pale yellow layer in the middle glowed beneath the white cream, cool and soft. Around 1974, at church suppers across the Midwest, a 9 by 13-inch tray of lemon lush, enough for 12 people, could cost less than $3. She pressed the buttery crust into the pan, beat cream cheese with powdered sugar, spread it into a cool layer, then laid the thick lemon pudding over the top. Finally, she covered it with white whipped topping, chilled it, and waited for the knife to cut it into clean-edged squares. This dessert had a very quiet kind of elegance. The lemon cut through the richness, the paper plate could hold each neat piece, and a crowded table usually left that spot empty very quickly. The cold lemon tray always went first. Number 6. Chilled cheesecake. The refrigerator door opened, and cold air spilled over the white cake. On top, the glossy red cherry layer sat still like a sign of celebration. Around 1972, in family kitchens across the American suburbs, a no-bake cheesecake could be made for about $1.75. She beat the cream cheese until soft, poured in sweetened condensed milk, added lemon juice and vanilla, then poured the mixture into the graham cracker crust. The cake sat in the refrigerator for a few hours. When the surface had set, she slowly spread the cherry filling over the top. Before cheesecake became a fancier restaurant dessert, this version had already held its place on the family table. Soft as mousse. Cool with lemon. Red and white in a way that felt made for an occasion. Cheesecake once set quietly in the refrigerator. Number 5. Oatmeal cake. The coconut topping on the cake bubbled under the broiler, then turned into dark brown patches fragrant with butter and sugar. In the 1970s, in church communities and crowded suppers across the Midwest, a large tray of oatmeal cake, enough for about 20 people, could cost less than $2. She soaked the oats in boiling water, mixed them into the cake batter, and baked it until the crumb was moist and firm. While the cake was still hot, she spread butter, brown sugar, evaporated milk, shredded coconut, and chopped nuts over the top, then slid the pan under the broiler so the topping could bubble and caramelize. People remembered this cake more on the second day than on the first. The crumb stayed soft for a long time. The edges turned slightly chewy. The toasted coconut clung to the tip of the fork and smelled wonderful. They called it Grandma's cake. Those trays made cheap desserts look more like an occasion. But near the bottom of the recipe box, the cards were usually no longer clean. There were the dishes that required skill, faith, and a little bit of family reputation. The final sweets: skill, faith, and the cake that was remembered. The closer the list came to the end, the quieter the desserts became. They no longer stood on the table as easy things to make. They carried with them the hand that had stirred, the pan that had been cut into squares, and the woman who knew how to make something cheap look as if it belonged to a special occasion. Number 4, hot chocolate sauce. Cake: she sprinkled cocoa and sugar over the surface of the raw cake batter, then poured boiling water on top. For a few seconds, the kitchen went still. Around 1976, in poor kitchens across the American South, a pan of chocolate cobbler could be made from pantry ingredients for about 90 cents to $1.25. She mixed the chocolate batter, sprinkled cocoa and sugar over the entire surface, then poured boiling water in a thin stream across the pan. The pan went into the oven with the smell of hot butter and lightly bitter cocoa. When it finished baking, the top had become a soft cake, while underneath a thick, dark chocolate sauce flowed around the spoon. This dessert made anyone seeing it for the first time pause. In the old kitchen, it was still a way to turn sugar, flour, cocoa, and boiling water into a bowl warmer than its price. Some recipes begin with faith. Number 3, prune cake. Few people said they liked prunes, but when the brown cake was cut, the plate was usually cleaned very quickly. Around 1974, in working-class families across the Ozarks and the South, a prune cake for Sunday baking could cost about $1.25 to $1.75. She simmered the prunes until soft, mashed them into the spice cake batter, added buttermilk, cinnamon, and nutmeg, then baked it until the top grew dark. While the cake was still warm, she poured a hot buttermilk glaze over it, leaving the surface lightly glossy like butterscotch candy. Prunes were cheap, kept for a long time, and made the cake's crumb moister than its humble appearance suggested. A cake like that could carry a family through several working days. Few admitted they liked it, but the plate came back clean. Number 2, caramel coconut dream bars. When the pan came out of the oven, the kitchen smelled like a small candy shop. Brown sugar, coconut, and butter clung to the edges of the pan. Around 1973, in community cookbooks, on church tables, and at bake sales across the Midwest, a pan of dream bars could cost about $1.25 to $1.75. She pressed the brown sugar butter crust into the pan, baked it until just set, then poured a mixture of eggs, brown sugar, coconut, vanilla, and chopped nuts over the still warm base. The pan went back into the oven. The edges darkened, the coconut topping turned chewy, and the center became soft and fragrant with caramel. Before the more famous layered bars came along, this dessert was already sitting on paper plates at bake sales. It cut into squares, wrapped easily, and disappeared after only a few rounds of people passing the table. Before 7-layer bars, there were dream bars. Number 1, banana cream pie with a crisp crust. Some people in a family are remembered through a single pie. A crisp crust, soft bananas, smooth custard, and a light white cream on top. Around 1971, in working-class family kitchens across the Midwest and the American South, a banana cream pie could be made for less than $2. She baked the pie crust first until crisp, cooked the vanilla custard until smooth, sliced the bananas evenly, arranged them inside the crust, and then poured the custard over the top. Once the pie had cooled, she covered it with light cream, chilled it, and waited for the first slice to stand firm on the plate. This was the dessert of someone who knew how to watch the heat, knew how to stir custard, and knew when to let a pie cool. The price was small, but the reputation lasted much longer. That pie kept her name alive. From the 75-cent batch of cookies on wax paper to the banana cream pie under $2, this list passed through hands that knew how to wait, how to stir, how to flip a skillet, and how to keep a recipe card for many more years. From the 75-cent batch of chocolate oatmeal cookies sitting glossy on wax paper to the pale green pistachio bowl on the church table, this list has passed through many old kitchens. There was the white cake tray soaked with stripes of gelatin. There was the spice cake hiding a can of tomato soup. There was old bread softening again in custard, caramelized pineapple running over a cast iron skillet, and a pot of tapioca that needed nearly an hour of slow stirring. In the end, the banana cream pie under $2 reminded people that even a cheap dessert still required skill. The crust had to be crisp. The custard had to be smooth. The bananas had to be just ripe enough. She knew when to stop. These desserts left the dinner table as life began to move faster, but each one still carries something worth keeping. One boiling minute, one night of waiting, one stirring spoon, one recipe card written in pencil. If your family once had a dessert like that, share it in the comments. Old recipes sometimes live on because someone still remembers what they were called. The last card was placed back into the wooden box, the lid closed very softly, but somewhere the smell of chocolate, cinnamon, vanilla, caramelized pineapple, and toasted bread still lingered on the old kitchen table. Because sometimes, a cheap dessert is the sweetest part of a whole time gone by.